Well, here we are again for our third discussion. And we tentatively gave the topic for this discussion, limitless time, because we now want to bridge into the deeper questions surrounding reincarnation, the deeper perspective. Where is reincarnation taking humanity? Where is this constantly learning and recycling, creating new and new platforms in our incarnational experience? Where is it going? Where is it taking us? What might the deep future look like? And most importantly, how might that understanding shift how we engage our life right here, right now? Yeah.
Yeah, very deep questions to follow.
Yeah.
Where should we begin?
Well, I think we should acknowledge that each of us have a deep experiential basis that we're kind of bringing to this discussion.
Yes.
We're not simply thinking about it, philosophizing about it, and speculating about it. We have deep convictions born out of unusual experiences. Why don't you speak to yours first?
It's true. It's why it's in a way what's brought us together around to do these dialogues, I think. And I was just explaining to you, that to discriminate the difference between knowledge and wisdom. So although we've explored strains of knowledge in this, wisdom is different from knowledge. It's the opposite in a way, because for me, the way I understand wisdom is wisdom comes through revelation. It comes through listening. It comes through being passive and then receiving. Whereas knowledge is something that you do opposite. You go after it, you chase it, you hunt it. You're going towards it instead of allowing it to come towards you. And so you get different information through revelation, and it's not information in the same way. It's cellular. So that so my experience, that's led to me being me and doing what I do, is because I have always had this, cellular understanding, cellular knowing of what's coming for humanity, and it's always it's quite hard to hold that. I'm sure you relate to that, Chris, because it's quite hard to hold it because it's not everyone else has it, and so it puts me in I'm more relaxed than most people I know at a fundamental level, because I have this knowing that everything's going to be fine. and I can't explain that knowing or even why it was given to me to have it. And I know that many people listening to this will have a resonance, and have had breakthroughs and visions where that has come to them. So, I think it's really good for us to acknowledge it, that we carry this other dimension. And you obviously, through your work, tell us a little bit about that. It would be lovely to hear.
I completely share what you're saying, because I do carry an unusual knowledge, as you do. Now, at the beginning of our series, we talked about the evidence for reincarnation. So I was in my professorial mode there, the intellectual digesting of this evidence. And the second conversation was kind of a blending of that type of knowledge and the type of wisdom that arises in my psychedelic work. And in today's discussion, I feel like I'm standing squarely within that other side of my life. I'm a visionary shaman. I'm a psychedelic visionary. My understanding comes out of the careful distilling of conscientiously engaged, non-ordinary states of consciousness, again and again and again, purifying and allowing the universe to take me deeper and deeper into what I experience as into itself and into its intention, into time, literally into deep time, and giving me experiences which were never intended to be just for me. They are planted in me to hold and then to pass on, as so many of, anyone who has these deep experiences, they're never just for us. We hold them for the larger collective. So I do, like you, I have a feeling for what's happening in history, where we're going. And it does tend to, it gives me a calm and a relaxation, even as we enter into very difficult and trying times ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think both you and I have that same kind of, knowing, I suppose, that birth is an intense event, and we're coming to a birth point. We're even in the canal, and contractions are occurring, and in the same way that I understand individual awakening. When awakening comes into a body, and it comes spontaneously, it kind of comes through contractions in a sense. So often before you have an experience, a transcendental experience, there are kind of shudders, and then there's openings and closings. There's condensing and intensification of shadow material, and then there's a kind of opening up, and then there's another birth contraction, and the contractions come closer and closer together, and eventually there's a kind of a deep opening to an epiphany of some form, like something that shakes the core of your being, and maybe fires within your DNA, so that it's something that just sets you alight and changes you forever. When those revelations come. And so I think that's what's happening on a planetary level as well. It's beginning to happen as a collective. And your writings, Chris, particularly through your Mind of the Universe, Diamond's book, it describes so beautifully this process of like coming down the birth canal. What it doesn't do, obviously, and what neither of us can do, is fill in the details, and only time can do that. But we'd like to give a bit of backdrop and both empathize with the intensity of the suffering that is already here and is most likely going to be ramped up. So we want to empathize with that, but at the same time, we want to present this this knowing that we have, that gives people hope, more than hope, actually. But it also provides some hope, doesn't it? Like there is a purpose to the events that are taking place on our planet right now. And right now is whenever you're watching this, because one can only imagine more events occurring as this canal opens up. So yeah.
You described that process of the inbreaking of the vision and the being drawn into the deep experience of revelation, because deep visions, deep insights cannot fit themselves into small containers. And so when nature or the divine or the universe invites us into a deeper experience, a more conscious understanding of life, it has to purify ourselves. And you describe that contracting process, and it is our past. It's everything about us which keeps us small, being burned up inside us in order to allow ourselves to be taken, shattered. It's, in my context, it's the death rebirth cycle, to die to everything within us which holds us where we are, and to be reborn into a larger world. And that can happen again and again, taking us deeper and deeper into that knowing. It's like any spiritual path. There are no shortcuts, and there's no easy way into this. It's always a very exacting and a very demanding road. But the fruit of that road is, well, it's personal and it's collective. It expands around us in all sorts of subtle and mysterious ways. And we are part of a lineage, each of us in our own ways, a lineage of people who have asked for more and who have been given more and have paid the price for being given more. And you're right, this is, my work started as thinking of my psychedelic work as kind of a personal healing or a personal transformation or personal awakening. And that just got shattered in the first few years, and everything about my work kept opening up into collective vistas, collective spaces, being drawn into the collective psyche, going through collective purifications and opening up into insights about our collective developmental process, experiencing reincarnation not simply as an individual soul journey, but as a species journey. That's a journey that our entire species is on, evolving itself through the systematic reincarnation, generation after generation, moving forward. And then being given a certain understanding about that this reincarnation process for us individually and collectively is coming into a crescendo. It's coming into some type of profound breakthrough, and you've languished it as a birth, and I think that's absolutely correct. And birth involves labor, and it involves a change from one state to another state. For a child, it's a change from a water being to a land being, and we are I think are growing from a state of individual egoic awareness where our identity is fundamentally our body, mind, ego, into a soul awareness where all of our former lives are coming together in a tremendous fusion point. There, as our knowledge of our past deepens and as we heal the traumas of our past that we're all carrying, and our past lives become more integrated, and we integrate not only their pains but their virtues, their great assets, their capacities, and all of this begins to take place, and it's like our lives come together and eventually they hit a fusion point. And at that point, the soul becomes one, totally, as I've experienced this, an explosion of light, an explosion into a higher order of individuality with a different threshold, a different sense of communion with the surrounding intelligence of the universe, the intelligence of the divine. And it's a different, to me, if humanity is going through this process, which I deeply believe it is, that's what my visions have shown me again and again, it represents a new foundation for the human story, a new phase of the human story, just as profound as when we made this jump about 200,000 years ago to a brain that's 50% bigger than the brain that we were carrying before, allowing us to think and do things that we could never do before. This is something which is going to change the fundamental archetypal architecture of the collective unconscious.
Yeah, beautifully said. It kind of brings two things I'd like to say in response, which are really reiterations of what you've said. And the first is that many people are watching this, you know, if you're drawn to this kind of material, there's a very good chance that you have said yes, you know, to receiving, to transmuting more shadow material, you know, more than one lifetime's worth. And I remember those dark days of my kind of past in which the level of shadow inside my body seemed insurmountable, you know, yep, and seemed endless. You know, whenever I would meditate, I would just find endless weight and heaviness and oppression, and, you know, like so much of it that it was just this big thick clot, and how would I ever burn through that? And gradually over the years, happily for me, and it's lightened, and so I've seen the light at the end of the tunnel, and I say this because I know that many watching this will also have that experience of grappling with a weight inside the physical, emotional reality, mental reality that far outweighs you know, the kind of individual wounding patterns of one life, you know, whatever they are, you know, and that's not to kind of, you know, put them lesser, but you know, we've taken on more, and the reason we've taken on more is because we are capable of taking on more. So if you feel that heaviness and weight in you, it's because you have the capacity, the deep, overwhelming, the love that's great enough to burn through that. So I say that to encourage people to continue on in your transformational path and not to lose hope. And the other thing I wanted to say is, when you look at times like this, like birth, and as you said, there's something that emerges that is completely new. When we're looking at life as it is today through the lens of history, we see a continuity. We see this continuity, this fairly unbroken continuity with blips and ups and downs and cycles repeating, and we see that through the patterns of our recorded history. And the one thing you never see in birth is you can't see beyond the break, because at some point there's a break in the continuity, and then something completely new is born. As you said, it's assembled out of all the elements of the old. It's condensed, it's revealed from all those elements coming into a symphony. And so it's completely different. It stands on the shoulders of all that's great and all that's been suffering, and all of that is suddenly kind of compressed, like the beginning of the universe. It was compressed into this tiny space, and that's what happens, is this incredible compression. And then there's this opening, as you said, an expansion of vast light. So what I'm pointing towards is that what's coming has no similarity to what we have now. We cannot, with our wildest imagination, we can begin to approach it. But you have to really, you never see a break in the continuity coming. You always assume, all of you humans, it's our way. We see things have always been this way. They'll always continue. Maybe, we're going to continue along this path, and then we'll get robotics, and we'll get technology, and we'll get this, and then we'll go to the stars. And, we think in the way that we've been trained to think. Until one of these crux points comes, and then it just smashes everything. And in a way, a whole new epoch begins. Something completely new with different technology, and we're the technology, we are the technology. I've been saying this to people, like, it's inside us. Our DNA has capacities, undreamed of capacities. And so I think it's really important that people grasp that what's coming bears no resemblance to what has been,
Yes, I completely agree with you. I mean, this is what happens in a psychedelic session as well. I mean, first, I completely affirm what you're saying about the weight and the burden that so many serious practitioners are experiencing. And I think it's because there's a lot of their past, which is past lives karma, which they're working and clearing now, but it's also collective karma, that great beings, and I think there are many more hidden saints than we might think. They have taken on responsibility for working on behalf of humanity as a whole, so that they are engaging darkness that comes not just from their personal history or soul history, but from our collective history. And we have to get through this period quickly. We have to bring about this transformation or cooperate with this process, because as every mother knows, you don't want the fetus to get stuck in the birth canal. That's not a good place to be. We want to keep everything moving through. And I think that many souls incarnating in this period of history saw what they were getting into, knew what they were getting into, and chose to do this work, because this is the work of birthing a new humanity is great work. And you're right, it's a discontinuity. In a session, when you go deep, deep, deep into the pain, it just looks like it's never, ever, ever going to end. You can't imagine how this will ever reconcile itself. And then there is a breaking point. There's a point of absolute surrender, of absolute cost paid. And then there is a waking up in a new reality, which is not an extension of the old reality in any way. You can't get to this new reality by refining, purifying, even healing the old reality. It is being catapulted in something which is a fundamentally new genre of experience, a new set of capacities. My experience in my sessions, when I've been taken deep into the experience of deep time, into the deep future, that's how I have experienced the course of humanity as well. That we seem to be first many visions over and over, and of course my visions, these are old. I mean, I started having these visions in 1991, so these are pushing 30 years old now. But a series of visions that we are coming to a turning point. The pace of the past could not be used as to measure the pace of the future. A turning, a before and after point, that after this historical transition, we would be operating at a completely different psycho-spiritual structure. We would be generating a different civilization because we would be different beings. We would not be confined and fragmented the way we are now. I mean, basically, our relationship with nature that we are experiencing now, the damage that we've done to nature was done by a species operating out of the egoic level of consciousness, which is a brilliant level of consciousness, but it's fragmented. It's fragmented from each other. It's fragmented from the foundation of life itself. A species which is operating with a healed heart and a healed mind, an open heart that embraces the great breadth of its own experience and human experience, and an open mind which is open to a deeper communion, a deeper taking in from higher orders of intelligence, higher orders of knowing. Such a being lives in the world differently than a human being does today. The soul lives in the world differently than the ego. The soul knows that the world that it leaves is the world that it's coming back to. So it takes better care of the world. The soul knows that its relationships have a depth of texture and history, and you don't walk away from any relationships. And so you take more care of all of your relationships and of all the people in that you're relating, because this is an ongoing developmental process. And I think we are coming into a point where the irony is life is not giving us any option except to go through this transition. There's no going back. The earth is not going to allow us. We've done so much damage to it. This damage is coming up to us now. We cannot continue living even in a simplified version of how we have gotten here. We have to reach into something entirely new, something radically new. And I think you're right that this is happening on the outside, and we are being called to a new relationship to the earth on the outside, but we are carrying within our hearts all the problems that have gotten us here. And we are carrying all the values and the potentials and the insights which are taking us beyond this into a different order. It's all inside. And you and I focus our work on the inside dance. There are other people whose work is to focus on the outside dance, to bring out the changes in the outer world to get us through. You know, all are needed.
So true, and beautifully put. And the inner transformation that you've just described. I mean, one thing that I'm reminded of, like those. If anyone's seeing this, familiar with any of Shakespeare's plays, particularly the comedies and the tragic comedies, like in some of those plays, everything that can go wrong goes wrong, and the wrong people fall in love with the wrong people. Everything gets twisted round. It's like one of those nightmares where it's just like, and you've got to act 4, and usually there's 5 acts, and it's still a complete mess. And as in the audience, you're going, oh my God, how is this ever going to be resolved? And then he does this magical thing where suddenly there's a kind of strange attractor that comes in, some force or some event that just suddenly triggers all these like sub events that makes everyone end up with the right person, and everything just gets healed and it's happily ever after story. But it happens very quickly. you know, always right compressed in the last moment. And in a way, it's a bit similar our time, because we've had this long, slow, you know, build up to create this mess.
Yeah.
And then there's this sudden kind of, you know, cataclysmic energy at the end, that then just, in which you could never quite see how these things are all going to be resolved, but they get resolved, and in a completely different way from what you were expecting. So, you know, and one of the things that you've spoken of a lot, Chris, is the speed at which things happen. And we can see that in natural systems, that, or you can just see it in water boiling. You know, it's the most obvious one, perhaps. You know, you look at the water and nothing seems to be happening, and nothing seems to be happening. And you put more and more and more heat into it, and then some bubbles start to appear. And just the first little pricks of bubbles on the surface. And then, of course, suddenly, when it hits that one boiling point, everything just erupts, and you have steam, you know, and this water starts to just change its state. And it's such a simple metaphor, but it's so true throughout the whole of nature. And if you look at the whole of humanity and history, you know, in a way, that's a period that we're reaching, and we'll begin to see that more and more. And the scientists are pointing to those things, like the ocean, for example, is capturing a huge amount of CO2, and it's called the sink. You know, it's sinking down deep into the deep ocean, where that CO2 is being stored, and it's slowly building up and building up and building up, until the ocean will be able to no longer capture any more CO2. And from that point onwards, and it's allegedly already occurred, it weakens. Its ability to store CO2 weakens, and therefore all the CO2 that we're creating suddenly explodes into the atmosphere. And it looks like we've been in this hiatus, you know, and we have, because there's this illusion that we've been okay. And then suddenly everything speeds up much more quickly than anyone could possibly have conceived, you know, and except, you know, some of the scientists who really know who've really analyzed the data deeply, and also, you know, people who work across multiple fields, you know, systems theorists, and people who really see the interconnectivity of different systems, can see the whole, and have and of course mystics like us. So there are, you know, many who are kind of predicting very, very quick change that can be very destabilizing for this planet. And you know, I know I'd love to hear what you're saying, what I want to say about this. And but we don't say it to alarm, but to prepare, because it goes alongside the inner awakening, and as the inner birth takes place, something on the outside, the structure, has to decline. It has to fall away in order for this new to come through. It's a universal law, and it's essential. You know, as you said, we can't repair the old system. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try and repair the old system, because there can be one, you know, hearing all this, you can think, well, I'm not going to do anything then. I'm just going to sit here. And that's an understandable response. And yet it's not a truly compassionate response, you know, because compassion also involves passion. And we need to stand up for what's right, and for justice, and what else, what's the purpose of being here, you know? So we need to continue forwards and use our passion wherever we are called to do so. That's part of our responsibility, and that's part of what it means to be an awakening being. And yet at the same time, we can have this other part of us that knows, well, I'm going to do whatever I can while this is collapsing. You know, I'm going to serve in the best way I possibly can. And that's how you know that you will always be in the right place. You'll always be in a safe place. And when I say safe, I mean safe in the sense that you're aligned with the core of your soul and its destiny. You know, that's a safe place to be. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That place of alignment. Yeah. The way that speeding up process worked itself out in my sessions, and it had to do with understanding the field dynamics of consciousness. I have just enough understanding of chaos theory and non-equilibrium systems to have a rudimentary understanding of what um, physicists or chaoticians but understand when a system gets more and more energy poured into it, it reaches a state of non-equilibrium or far from equilibrium. And when it's in that condition, like that water, which is getting more and more energy poured into it, or a bathtub, when you keep increasing the quantity of water that's going into the tub and the ripples they start to change, we come to a tipping point, a bifurcation point, where the system has too much energy to maintain its current structures, and it does a flip into a different organizational pattern. It goes through this bifurcation point, it chooses a different future, it flips into a higher organizational pattern. And when physical systems reach non-equilibrium points, they can do extraordinary things. They can produce new particles. They can produce orders of coherence within themselves that would have been impossible at a lower energy state. In my visionary experiences, I was given to see that all of humanity, we are all fractal nodes within unified fields, a field of consciousness. The human unconscious, the collective unconscious is a field, and it is an energetic field which reflects all of our individual experiences. And when enough individual experiences become untenable, when they become so painful, we just reach out in desperation for a different solution to the situation. It's not just we individually who are going through this type of ordeal of transformation, but all of us collectively. We've never had anything happen in history which is comparable to what's coming at us now. Because when we've had hurricanes or great natural disasters, they've always affected one part of the world, but not the other part of the world. But the global systems crisis that seems to be imminent, being driven by a global ecological crisis, is going to affect all continents, all people, all places. That's going to push humanity into a different experiential field. And the point here is that the collective psyche is going to be energized by all of this disruption. It literally is going to begin to boil underneath us, underneath our individual minds. And my understanding of what's happening is that in evolution, there are kind of multiple levels of evolution, at least say 2 levels of evolution. We and I are being born over and over again. We're born for 100 years at a time. We live 100 years, 100 years. But underneath those 100-year cycles, there is a learning taking place. There is a developmental process taking place. We usually refer to this as the soul. So the individual ego incarnates, but the soul is growing, becoming more, suffusing our lives. But the same thing happens collectively. Every generation, billions and billions of people are being born, but there is a learning gathering underneath them that is collecting all of their learning in these deep, deep collective archetypal structures. That's what's coming to boil, not just our individual incarnation, but that underlying structure is coming into a high energy state. And I think it's coming to a state where the sheer energy of our suffering, the energy of our despair, or the energy of our anxiety is driving us through a breaking point where suddenly we're going to be flooded with a different kind of common sense, a different set of priorities, a different set of values, a different experience of each other. The only way I think that we can go as far as we need to go in order to save ourselves and the planet in as little time as we have is to understand the dynamics of the collective unconscious, the field dynamics of consciousness, and how fields operate in non-equilibrium systems. At least this is what has come through my visionary experience over and over, that we are coming to a point where there is a crisis which builds in intensity until it looks like all is lost. It so much disruption, so much loss of control, so much death, challenge at a very deep level. But when it's at its worst, it begins to pass. We pick ourselves up. We somehow rise to the challenge of this crisis. And in rising to the challenge, we are changed. We are profoundly changed, such that as we start to come out of this period of history, we find that what our nature, the nature that we are carrying, is not just a different set of attitudes, not just a different set of beliefs, but a fundamentally new way of being conscious, a new organization of our consciousness emerges. Something has shifted in place. And we find that things which were not easy are suddenly easy. Things which are out of reach are suddenly within reach. Possibilities are emerging much faster than we would have ever predicted. That's the type of transformation I think we're looking at. A truly a rebirth of humanity. So that's, in my work, I call it the birth of the future human. You know, it is truly a demarcation of a different kind of human being emerging. Now, I think our history is creating this. It's reincarnation, which is coming to a phase of fruition. And I think we can get insights in or glimmers of what the future will look like by looking at the great beings of our past, the great saints, the great prophets, the great incarnations, the Christ, the Buddhas, the prophets, those great beings who have always called us into a higher order of existence. Those are prototypes, I think. The prototypes which give us an inclination, an understanding of what we are in the process of becoming as a species collectively. I think we are truly becoming a species of Christ, a species of Buddhas, a species of prophets, you know, with that magnitude, that tremendous scale of heart. I don't know how long it's going to take us to make this transition. Clearly, the ecological crisis, which is fermenting, is a crisis that's going to be deepening for generations. It'll be at least 3 generations, 4 generations before we hit the peak of this crisis. But I think we will come through it. And I think we're not talking thousands and thousands of years. We're talking, we have to make this within a few hundred years to make this transition. And I think the 21st century is the key century of the unraveling. It is the where we make key choices that shape our future. And one of the other things that happens in non-equilibrium systems is that individual changes, small changes, can catapult into massive outcomes. So the butterfly's wing in China sets off a hurricane across the planet. That metaphor that individuals who have achieved within themselves something of what humanity is aspiring to change for solving these large problems, the impact of individuals increases exponentially in non-equilibrium systems. So just in contrast, if we look just to the past, we say, well, the individual can't do anything. We're being overwhelmed by just these overwhelming historical forces are coming at us. It's just the opposite. As things intensify, the individual becomes more significant, a more significant player. So beings who achieve a wholeness within their person, they achieve a robust soul consciousness in their person, have a tremendous catalyzing effect on people around them coming to their own version of that deep experience as well.
Thank you. I love listening to you when you go off on a transmission. I was thinking, you know, if you were to ask yourself what one thing, if there was one thing that happened on this planet that could change everything quickly overnight, what might that one thing be? And inside me, the answer is that for us to see through the veil of death, because the moment one person sees through the veil of death, fear is no more. It just isn't. There is no fear, because that's where fear resides. So the intensification of the energy you're talking about, the suffering, the love, all of it pouring towards this one kind of point. This, it's the only thing that has the power to pierce that veil of death. And so what I would expect, and what I have sort of seen through the gene keys and through my teachings and transmissions, is that more and more people will gradually, as this boiling takes place, experience their consciousness, having the ability to transcend life, birth, and death, that cycle of life. And be able to, that consciousness will retain the memory between life, birth, and death, and carry it across, and what that, because that's pure awakening. And when a being has that level of awakening, and they're sitting there manifesting or standing there just moving around being who they are, and that is being emanated, it is electrifying. It's electrifying to anyone else. It's catching, it's contagious. The transmission of wisdom and love and awakening is contagious. If most people will know this. You go near one of these beings and you can feel it. It crackles in the air. And so the more and more that is occurring, the more and more this veil of it will be breaking down. And then fear will start to leave this planet gradually, person by person, generation by generation. And I even believe deep inside my cells that will enable children to come through, to be born without the wound of humanity, just be born awake, and therefore not have to go through this journey. And of course, those children are us. Those are our future vehicles. And they will be born through those awakened ones, because if you have two awakened ones coming together to bring a child, then you have a clear conduit, and that's a vessel that you might want to jump into to experience. And then more and more of that. And so in a way, you could almost perceive that that's how the awakened consciousness will colonize the gene pool, of humanity, literally, like a virus of love. It will just begin to spread, and it's non-denominational. It doesn't, it's everywhere. It's in the weirdest places. It's in the tiny little communities, because it's everywhere. It's not fixed on any chosen people, as in the past. So it's going to wake up. I always liked that one liner that Jesus left behind him, where he said, when I return, I will return like a thief in the night. And I contemplated that for many, many years. And one day I just saw that. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, it's coming. You can't stop it. It's secret. It's hidden. It's everywhere. It's a thief in the night. It's just going to arrive. And it's this, new human that we're talking about. This is the new human that we've both seen. And I think many people are sensing here already among us, in its potential, like you mentioned, the Buddhas and things. And one thing probably that I loved more than anything else in your book, Chris, is when you described the future human. And I was left with this image of all these Buddhas sitting down, meditating and stuff. And then this one human standing in the middle of them, standing on its own 2 feet. And that was the future human. And I thought, I feel like that's such an enduring, iconic symbol of what's coming. Because we're it's no longer the journey of meditation and spiritual awakening and the spiritual journey and this awakening through transformation of the shadow. Suddenly that's come to an end. you know, and suddenly that being is standing. You know, there's no practice anymore other than living.
Yeah.
You know, and then that human really begins a new humanity, because
Yeah.
there's no more awakening process. There's the layers and layers of creative expansion, always infinite creative expansion.
Yeah.
And there's playfulness, and there's, you know, new layers of engagement within the, you know, within the construct of reality. You know, you know, all these levels and dimensions and fields that we can explore, you know, through a new way. And what I really see clearly is, as the age of suffering comes to an end, you know, we have a new field, and it's bliss. You know, we have learned enough from suffering. Now is our chance and opportunity to learn from bliss, because bliss is the other side of suffering. It's the same, it's almost the same thing. It's all that suffering leads to bliss. And yet bliss is just the other. It's like the white hole to the black hole. You know, it's like you go through a black hole, you come out the other side, there's this white hole, and it's and it has as much depth and juice as suffering does. You know, so that there's, you know, there's a similarity to them, but it's a new muse that humanity has. You know, so when we sit in that bliss and we move through that bliss, we're moving through the highest aspects of our consciousness, and that then has to all be explored, all of it, because bliss, like suffering, has layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, and dimension and dimension and dimension. And it you know, there's a whole epoch needed again just to explore bliss. So that's why, in a way, if you can hold that in your heart and your mind as we move through these very difficult, you know, decades ahead, and centuries, perhaps few centuries. I agree, by the way, 21st century seems, you know, it seems to be the one. The next century, you know, seems to be the one. And you know, remember, that's us. You know, like we'll be there. I mean, you know, I say to people, you don't want to miss this. You know, like people saying like, oh, this is my last incarnation. Okay, well, make sure you come back for that one, because you don't want to do all this and then not have the reward. So all things are possible at that stage, and I think it's really good to bear these things in mind as we're moving through, you know, intense periods.
Let's allow ourselves to look deep into the future of this future human, because whatever transformation we're going through, and we are going through, you know, we agree we're going through this acute transformation, we're giving birth to a new order of human capacity, however long it takes us to do it, you know, a few hundred years, whatever. The human story is not stopping. The evolutionary drama is not ending. This is simply going to be a new platform within which the human story will continue to develop. I think you're right that we have been evolving through learning from suffering. That's been the great teacher in much of our learning of the past. But I think you're right. We are getting past that. We're growing out of that, just as we are growing out of our fear of death. You know, if there were one thing that I wish I could give people from my sessions, it would be to lose the fear of death, because if you're afraid of death, you just have your whole cosmology upside down. You just don't understand what's going on. You know, death is graduation. Death is the great respite. Death is the great reward. So we're coming into this period of deep transformation, of living out of bliss, living out of joy, exploring out of bliss and joy. And I think you're right, it's going to take us a long time to experience the levels and levels of creativity that can come out of that. So the Divine Project has brought us to this crisis, the evolutionary natural however you want to envision, the Tao project has brought us to this crisis, is taking us through it. We're not doing it. I mean, this is much larger than you or I or any individual collection of people. Nature is driving us through this metamorphosis. Nature has just decided we're ready, we're time, we're going through this thing. New platform, new beginning, but it's not going to stop. We're here for another million years. We're here for another billion years. So I think we should really look deeply at understanding that we're not only talking about a kind of new humanity as we can imagine it now from our limited position. We're talking about a new humanity beyond our capacity to imagine, because it is so different. One of the things that happened at the last vision I was given, the last session, is a session that I call Diamond Vision, because in the session, I was given a 10-minute experience of being able to see 1,000 times more clearly, more precisely, more exactly, with more discrimination than I'd ever been able to see before. It wasn't a hallucination. It was just absolutely, I could not imagine that I had accepted the dull experience of ordinary vision as real vision. And when it disappeared, I realized I had been given an experience of seeing the way the future human, that all future humans will see. This isn't just a transformation of our heart and a transformation of our mind. It's a transformation of our senses, that our touch and taste and vision and hearing is going to be more and more refined, more subtle, more exquisite. The capacity of consciousness to heal the body, to keep it on an even keel, to transform it, the capacity of consciousness to infuse and lift the body into ecstatic states of creativity. I mean, we're just getting started into actualizing some of the higher potentials that are already built into the human form, but are being activated by this evolutionary process, setting us on fire. And then the question becomes, well, what might lie down the road? And we could lose ourselves in maybe projections and fantasies about that. But the only thing that's really important is to understand, I think, the high stakes of what's involved here. We're not trying to simply fix or heal humanity. We are on the threshold of birthing a different order of human existence, which is going to become the new platform for yet still more higher orders of human existence. This is a hugely significant undertaking that we are about. It's not simply trying to rectify a short-term past. It's a cascading effect into a very, very different future. It's a very high stakes game with very, very great rewards that are coming in this time. If our nature is truly infinite, as I think we agree it is, if Brahman is Atman, the essence of the individual is the essence of the divine, our nature is infinite, then reincarnation gives us an infinite amount of time in order to unfold and to activate our infinite nature. I think if we qualify it carefully, we are learning to be gods. We are learning how to create on a scale that we've never envisioned except in our mythologies or in our science fiction mythologies. Yeah.
So true. So true. And one of the things that I have seen, and my way of describing that mythology is, we are, and I'm not the first person to explore this, it's these different species or races or, that are kind of evolving on our planet. And we've been through these before, actually, and we're part of a much deeper epoch story than we realize. And we may have even forgotten previous epochs. And because of the break in continuity between epochs is so massive, so But each time we go through one of these portals, we include and transcend more of, we remember more of what came before. So I feel that's also potential, that we remember more of what came before as we move into what we're becoming. And in a way, from my understanding, is that this is almost like the final stage or cresting of humanity's epoch, and I, because it then moves into the culmination of this next, since we're looking far, 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 far ahead, the culmination of this next species, is our collective harmony with the whole of Gaia. It's coming into absolute harmony with the entirety of Gaia. So taking our highest seat as the consciousness of Gaia, and as the gardeners of Gaia, as the stewards of Gaia, as an inseparable from the tiniest ant, and like everything being part of our highest capacity here, and the beauty of Gaia. So we haven't yet seen, maybe at the very beginning, we haven't yet seen Gaia, as in her flowering state, fully flowering, with all her essences just released in perfect harmony, and us being able to move through the garden and sup the nectars of everything here, all of that, and each animal and each creature and each having their place, and within us, because they have a place within us. We are, there's no separation anymore. And so there's this incredible crystallization of the harmony of all the architecture of life on Gaia. And my feeling is that this next phase of our evolution is about the weaving together of Gaia, of all those creatures and things, and understand. So every one of us has a specific weaving role in that, to weave back together certain neurological pathways that are unique to us, that only we could weave, because only our creativity wants to go there. So we follow our creativity, and it weaves together some aspect of Gaia. And then all of us together doing that creates this beautiful tapestry of wholeness. And the other aspect to this that I've seen is, as the process continues, there's a timeline. It's very strange, it's almost like a spiral, the arc of time. And as we get closer and closer towards perfection, the timeline closes in on itself more and more and more. So in a way, time itself is being condensed. And when you get to that final, this is a lovely joke, when you get to that final crystallization point of perfection, time itself dissolves. It's so in a way, my joke is that when you finally get to heaven, it stops. Everything stops. It's like it's finished. It's like there's no. It would look like, from our vantage, like, well, there's no time to enjoy it, but actually, there's infinite time.
Infinite time. Yeah.
So that's when humanity, finally transcends humanity. And then there's another one of those epoch shifts in which, and it's beyond our comprehension. You might even say, we then leave this sphere, our consciousness then moves to another sphere. We're and Gaia is left with, she's not left alone, because it's a chain, right? So now the animals start to kind of crystallize, and their evolution starts to continue and flower. So everything ratchets up, and even the rocks and the minerals are kind of moving up a layer. Everything is interconnected. So consciousness is embedded in everything, but it awakens in these layers, in these contractions. And then we move somewhere else, somewhere else. We're beyond the time-space continuum. That we've graduated from this chain of evolution, this epoch. And then we're in this. We realize we're nested as part of something far wider, because we've remembered. We're galactic. Gaia was just like our playground. That was another birth. And then we're in a galactic world, and so it goes on, and so it goes on, and so it goes on.
Wow.
But that's you know, when you go far, far, far ahead, and you, like, I know you've been there, Chris. You know, it's so the tapestries are so vast that, you know, but they're fractal, right? So they're repeated right down. So when you look at, you know, it's like Blake saying, you know, eternity in a grain of sand, in a wild flower. You know, it's like it's in everything. The same fractal patterning is embedded in all at all levels. So it's just these waves of wider and wider awakening and creativity, and that's, you know, that's where we're going, and that's where we are, and we never leave the present moment. That's the beauty. We never leave the freedom of the present moment, even when we're in crisis, you know. And that's what's going to become, in a way, for me, the most important thing, is that as the crisis comes, we never leave the present moment, and we never forget where we're going, you know, that this is all for a purpose. So that is the, you know, when we have to swallow the pill of suffering, of intense suffering, that's the other pill we take, that kind of the medicine that reminds us that the suffering is it has grace embedded in it, you know.
Yeah. I love hearing you go. When you go, you really go. And I love, because I feel so deeply resonant with what you're describing.
Yeah.
That this Earth, this solar system, is part of a galaxy, which is part of a supercluster of galaxies. Time space is part of a universe, which is part of a larger meta universe, which is part of another larger universe. We are going through this very, very exciting, very important transformation. Humanity is going through this tremendous transformation. And yet there are other species around the galaxy going through their own transformations. And so we don't have to deny any of that. We can affirm all of that while also paying tremendous attention to what's taking place. How do we take full advantage of the growth opportunity that this time in history is giving us right here? Because my understanding is we choose our incarnations, so that everyone who listens to this video chose to be in history right here, right now. They chose to be part of this traumatic moment, this birth moment, this ecstatic, exploding moment in history. They chose to be part of it. And they are exactly where they chose to be in order to have the greatest impact on positive outcome. That it's not a matter of searching for what should I do or how do I respond. Look under our feet. We are already planted. We have the talents. We have the relationships around us. We are already where we can do the most good if we're willing to take responsibility and act, really do it. And that's what you're talking about, being centered in we know when we're centered in our role in life. We know when we're centered in our work, even if we're suffering at that moment, we have a deep confidence that this is what we're to do. There'll be so many distractions being offered to us to not pay attention, distract ourselves with movies, distract ourselves with this, that, and the other. It's when things get hard, it's going to be very inviting to be elsewhere. But if we are really here, right now, putting all of our endeavor into this moment, that is the fastest way to move through the harder part and into the joy, into the bliss, into the cooperation, into the collaborations, into the opportunities for our individual work to meet with fellows on the journey and compound into larger and larger projects. We won't get there by allowing ourselves to be distracted. We get there by complete commitment to our circumstances, where we are, as we are. And I think you're right. In that deep penetration of the present, we get glimpses and touches and tingles of the whole structure of the meta universe, which is also pouring all of its energy into the present. We meet heaven only in the present. We meet the galactic superstructure in the present, in this moment, in this grand kind of collaboration with destiny. So we've wandered a long way from our early talking about, well, what's the evidence for reincarnation? But it, the communion with the universe is what drives both of us, I think. You know, this deep communion, the opportunities for deepening the communion, for letting go of all the things that get in our way, and going into a deep sharing of the divine breath, a deep communion of the divine joy, to really let it in as deeply as we can possibly let it in the years that we have remaining, and then our next incarnation and our next incarnation.
Beautiful, Chris. Thank you. I don't think I could add anything to that. I don't think there's anything else needs to be said. Is there?
Well, maybe not here and now, but certainly in another time and another place. We'll wind it up again, and we'll launch. I love our discussions. I love our discussions with you. I love what happens when we get together.
Yeah, me too. And I think, you know, our various different communities will hopefully come together and explore these things in new and creative ways. That's certainly, I think, my intention, to continue this this dialogue in all kinds of different ways, and to invite others also into this dialogue, to explore, to create, to come up with, you know, proactive, creative routes forwards in the world, depending, you know, what is coming to us. And you know, there's a lot of great genius that's being drawn to these kinds of discussions and these communities. And when the genius comes together, it's capable of so much. And I know that, you know, many hearts are wanting to come together and be of service, as you said, you know, to be of the greatest service. So I think there will be opportunities for lots of things in the times ahead. So I want to really personally thank you for being a great inspiration to me, and for,
likewise, really,
confirming many of my deep held knowings, and kind of matching me along the journey, and you know, and sometimes just really pushing me a little bit further as well. So I really appreciate that. And
likewise, it works both ways. Much love and blessings in your work, and it's just a joy to spend time with you. It truly is. It opens me up. It invites me forward. I receive much from our conversations.
Likewise, absolutely.